The personal brand will open the door. The sales strategy is going to close the deal.
It used to be that you were able to have a simple, really good product. You'd have a bit of a product market fit with a good VC. That was really a good recipe. Fast forward to where we are now. If you don't have those elements, but also a strong personal brand, then you run that risk of really not being able to build a solid company. Hi everyone, I'm Michael, founder of Empath, a fintech advisory firm for Europe, advising different fintechs and startups across Europe for the past roughly 10 years or so. Today, I'm joined with Yota, who's one of our brand experts. Yota, if you want to give a quick introduction to yourself.
Hi, Michael. Hi, everyone. I am Yota Trom. I'm a personal brand expert and a leadership coach, and I've been working over the past few years with hundreds of executives, helping them develop their executive brands, but also their leadership skills as part of their growth journey.
Today, we've actually joined forces to bring up a topic that's actually something we're seeing a lot of the time on a lot of our clients' minds. So as mentioned, I've been working with founders and startups to mainly help advise them on commercial and sales strategies. You're helping individuals on their brand strategies. What I think we're finding, or we know we're finding, is this topic is becoming a more common theme across both of our worlds. Now, it's interesting because uniquely, you would think a sales marketing world versus a personal brand world, how does that actually tie together? And is that even relevant nowadays? And that's exactly why we're here today, is actually to discuss why this is becoming a more important topic. So we've broken down the discussion into really kind of three parts. One, we'll kick it off by just discussing how the market is actually shifting and moving, to get a sense of why this is even becoming a topic. Two, we'll discuss really how the founder-led sale, or the founder in general, can benefit from having both growth mindset and also from having a brand mindset combined into one. And three, we'll then work also through the VC lens, because I think it's interesting to bring not just the founder lens, but then the VC lens and overall the capital lens for different businesses, and realistically see how brand is changing all these areas. So maybe to kick it off, Yota, really from your world, before I kind of go into mine, what are some of the key things that you're seeing when you're working with executives, mainly on the brand side of things?
First of all, we see a difference in the market. Personal branding has become the hottest topic over the last few years. And I feel a few executives understand that, and a few companies understand that, and they invest into the executive presence of their senior leaders. But the gap that we've seen as we were discussing with each other was also that VCs, they kind of start to understand why there's a need, but they cannot combine that with their strategy and sales strategy and how they're approaching startups. And then founders, I think they're really not leveraging the power of personal branding in order to succeed in their goals, whether that goals are growth, whether it's hiring the best talent, whether it's raising money or selling their companies. They're not aware about how powerful personal branding can be and how many doors they can open and how many doors it can open. And I feel here there is a huge missed opportunity.
Agreed. I think that's a really interesting point you raised, because I think before it used to be that you were able to have a simple, really good product if you were a founder of a startup. And let's go back maybe 10 years ago. You could have a really, mainly bringing, of course, the fintech lens. There's lots of different industries, but this unanimously is across it. You'd have a really great product. You'd have a bit of a product market fit, meaning some customers would potentially be willing to pay you for your product. And if you had that combination with a good VC that gave you enough runway and kind of left you alone, that was really a good recipe in 2016, 17, 18. Fast forward to where we are now, that recipe, I would argue, doesn't even exist anymore. If you don't have those elements, but also a strong personal brand when it comes to being a founder, a sales executive, anyone really in the business, which we'll come on to in a second, then you run that risk of really not being able to build a solid company. Brandon, as I'm seeing it now, is the fundamental elements that's coming out in most of the successful startups that I've been kind of advising. So I think one kind of question before we maybe move on to some of the growth side of the world and how that is kind of translating into brand. When it comes to maybe your work with executives on brand, How do you find them to be when they are on this topic? Are they resisting it? Do they feel it's necessary? Do you find a lot of executives embracing this, or how does that kind of come up in your
I think
world?
what I see is that more and more executives start to understand the value. But also there are a lot of misconceptions about what personal branding is. So they think that they should be on social media 24/7, that they need to be extroverts, that it's all about what you post on your profile. But for me, personal branding is something way more important and something deeper, actually. It's the perception that people have of you. And from the moment we see someone, we're shaping a perception about who this person is. So what personal branding does is putting us into the driver's seat so we can control the narrative. And instead of allowing people to shape any perception, we are controlling that perception to make sure that it aligns with who we really are. There is this expression that is kind of viral, which is fake it till you make it. I completely disagree with that. And I think a brand that is based on that premise is actually, it looks as if you're building something in the sand that's going to collapse. Because when the brand is fake and the person doesn't support it, then they won't enjoy doing it. And also people understand when we're authentic or not. And authenticity is very much connected with trust. So when our personal brand is not authentic, is not coming from the inside, then people understand that that's fake and then they don't trust us. So the way I'm working on personal branding is how can I bring out the strengths that are lying within each leader, whether it's a founder, whether it's a VC, whether it's anyone that I might be working with, an entrepreneur. But it's really important that we identify what are these elements that they make us unique and special, and then bring them to the light so people can see. And I feel there's still this misconception that is preventing a lot of people from investing into their personal brands. But when personal branding is done properly, then it's just a continuation of who you really are, and it's really fulfilling. So if someone has been trying to do that and it doesn't feel like them, it means they're probably approaching it from the wrong angle, rather than it's not what personal branding is. It shouldn't feel like that, because you're just letting people see who you are, and that should feel natural and really fulfilling in the end of the day.
That's really nice to hear, because I think that's a good segue into maybe the startup world when it comes to growth and the mindset of a startup with growth. But before we do that, actually kind of to help segue into that, I want to bring an example. First, it's really good to hear that that's how your clients are being, or at least embracing it, mainly from the fintech space, especially when it comes to startups. When you're in that early stage, as a founder, you are still very much in a founder-led sales mentality. I'm sure some of the executives you're working with are probably entrepreneurs that have maybe 2-3 businesses at this point. And so they're beginning something else. And some of them already get this, and maybe some are in the beginning of that journey. But when you're in a founder-led sale, you as a CEO, CTO, CPO, doesn't matter. You're responsible for selling, even if you're not a salesperson or you're not a marketeer, however you want to call that nowadays. And mainly for fintech, the really big challenge that most startups that I am advising and working with face is one of the principles of trust. Because within startup, there's money flowing around, people's money is moving around. Trust is a basic principle of the industry. So you mentioned the word authenticity, which is really great, because that brand element, bringing more authenticity to the surface, really would benefit a lot of founders that are in that category, help establish really solid trust principles with their potential customer base. So if you think about the early stage startup, if you're building a bank, for example, or if you're building some form of a fintech bank-like proposition, having a founder and the brand that they emulate will naturally have an attraction for new customers that they may not have acquired themselves. And when you're in that early stage of a business, you also usually don't have a lot of capital to spend. A lot of your capital is going into building the product, building the team, getting things in motion. So your marketing spend is really low, and your spend of acquisition is probably extremely low because of just the stage you're at. How you can circumvent this is through a solid personal brand, because I've seen it very repeatedly time and time again. One founder that has a solid network is one thing, but a founder that has a solid network and brand is another thing. And that immediately helps win over new businesses and customers for you to have as clients, and can actually go from there. So I think that's an interesting kind of a segment that you can really see from there.
I also want to add another element to that, and something that I see a lot through my work with founders is that personal branding is really helping them build their confidence. So a lot of these founders, it might be even their first business, their second business, but these people have not been used to be on media. They have not used to be salespeople. They do not know these skills. And a lot of times they think, oh, I just need to learn how to sell. But actually, for me, it's not selling, it's positioning. So when you know your positioning, when you know who you are, what you stand for, your values, but what are also your strengths that you need to project to other people, that gives you a huge sense of confidence. And that's one of the biggest things that I think my clients get from me when I ask them, what is the biggest value? It's the element of confidence, because when we do the personal brand, we start from within, and that is really solid. So that is giving them the confidence, and then from your side, you're giving them the tools. And that's why I think it's so interesting to have this conversation, because it's personal branding from the one side and then sales strategy. And now what we see is what is necessary for the market is we bring those two together instead of working in silos. So I feel confidence is such a huge thing. And a lot of founders, you might think, oh, they built this business, they must be super confident. But I can promise you that in every single conversation I have with my clients, we're going to talk about confidence from some perspective. It's not always the same for everyone. And there are different areas of confidence that we need to work with each founder. For some of them, it might be how they look, how they dress. For some of them, it might be public speaking and how they address different audiences. Some of them might be the sales strategy and how they show up in those conversations. But I think there is that huge element that founders are expected to just do it magically, but no one has ever trained them. So there is this high expectation to deliver to something that they haven't done ever before. And putting yourself out there is really challenging. It requires vulnerability, it requires courage, and it's not something that they just should be expected to do. It's something that you learn. It's a skill.
It's interesting, actually, you say that, because founders, CEOs of businesses and companies, they obviously are the heart of the business. They have to be carrying so many different weights, plates spinning at the same time. And they have to constantly pivot between being an expert maybe in the product side, then being an expert in sales and being an expert in tech. So I can imagine what that is. I've seen that a lot of times. But you mentioned a really good thing, because it's actually sticking to kind of the growth, how brand helps growth of startups. If we move away from the early stage and we go more towards the mid stage of a startup, you even see growth now, you even see brand becoming even more critical for a founder. Not necessarily because in the early stage, brand is going to help you really acquire new customers, win new business. In that mid stage, it still does that. But there's another fundamental thing that a founder has to do at that moment. They have to build a company culture. They have to stand by principles. They have to get fundraising. They have to keep the heartbeat of the business growing and amending and scaling. And so what's interesting is that I see when a founder is ready to move away from founder-led sales and they bring in their first sales team, what ends up happening is founders that don't have a solid confidence brand element to them tend to get washed out by their own commercial team, because the commercial team usually comes in with these pillars in place because they're used to being selling in market. But founders that have these pillars in place are able to win over some of the best salespeople to start working for their businesses and their companies. And that comes based on just having principles and the right kind of confidence. So it's interesting, because I think when you take it from the growth kind of point of view, that mid stage of helping to kind of build a company culture and keep that growing becomes really important. And then the last, I'd say, kind of stage, or you will, about a business is when a startup has reached its true scale up stage and they have maybe 200 people working for them, a commercial team of, let's say, 20. That includes marketing and sales and everyone that's really in that side of the business. You end up seeing an interesting thing starting to shift. So if we look at, for example, some of the startups that are out there right now that have a solid founder brand, I think, which is interesting, where people that have worked for these companies have praised about these companies and have been very successful with these companies. Whether or not you agree with these founders and their opinions and ideals is a different topic. But if you, for example, look at Klarna has an amazing CEO that has an amazingly solid brand. Even their marketing strategy has been centered a lot around different influencers and people in that space right there. Revolut, as controversial as their CEO is, he has a solid, brand and being a very specific kind of a way. And I know a lot of times, and some people listening in might say, well, brand is a company element, and the startup or the company or the fintech fuels the brand. But it's when you see those companies that have a founder that with a solid brand in addition or driving that actual brand of the company, those are the ones I see quite interesting. Last point in that topic before we kind of move on to maybe some of the VC world and how that might transpire is when you're building a commercial team or a sales team in 2025, 2026 and beyond. We open this up by discussing how the market is shifting and moving. One of the really important things is that now the market has moved away from just having a sales team of people that just can sell, meaning, getting a lead in, taking a lead, having it be closed and through a sales process. You're now moving into a situation where I personally wouldn't even hire a salesperson if I was running a team that didn't have a brand element to themselves as well, didn't have a market awareness, didn't have a ability to even help advise and guide on their own brand kind of approach. So what's interesting is if you have a founder that is bringing brand and confidence to the table, then you also have potentially a company culture that encourages that for people working as well. And that just spawns a lot of unique ideas, I think, overall from that kind of point of view.
I totally agree with you. And a big part of my work is leadership development. I've been doing that for years. I have coached over hundreds, more than maybe 600-700 of people so far. The one thing that a lot of time leaders forget is that they act as role models. Even though the market is not great at the moment, there are a lot of things going on, but especially in the startup world, whether it's more at the beginning or mid-stage, what we see is there's a lot of competition and startups are competing to get the best talent. So there is where we need to leverage, whether it's the founder brand or the leader brand, because people will work for someone that they believe and they align with. So they might not even align with the values of the company as a whole, but they might align with the values of this specific leader. And actually they might decide to join the organization because this specific leader is there. And as we're looking both into talent attraction and retention, which are the two main problems and the biggest cost that the company has right now, the opportunity here is the branding, the personal branding of the leaders, because they are becoming the pole of attraction for this talent. And that's when we save a lot of costs in either case, because first of all, when you're in a company where there is strong personality of a leader, someone that you believe in, that cares about the people, that wants to invest in the people, then people want to stay and they see the value, even though maybe everything is not perfect. On the other side, or from the lens of someone who is going to go in the company, the first thing that they're going to see is who is their manager, who is their team. And if the company hasn't done a great work at investing into building the brand of these people, then you're missing an opportunity compared to a company that has done that. One of the things that I see more and more over the last few years is that companies are hiring me to go and train on personal branding their whole teams. So we're not even doing that as one-to-one basis. We're doing that in a workshop style. So all the team gets to understand what is personal branding, how do we do it, what are the elements, and then working with with each individual to bring out the things that we want to highlight and amplify. But I feel it's the mindset here that is so important, and that's the one thing that I would like people to take away from this conversation, is to realize that personal branding almost costs nothing. And has so much power. It can open up so many doors, both as a leader in order to empower and inspire your people, but also in order to attract the right people that will want to work with you.
I love that. I think it's another really good point you touched on, because a lot of people have probably, a lot of people listening into this might even have been laid off in the past, let's say 2 years, 3 years, right? It's hit probably every corner of every industry at some point.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of people that believe most likely the startup culture, that family culture is dead. And I would argue I agree to some extent. Now, saying this, there's a new rise of startup culture, family culture in the startup that's existing, and from what I'm seeing in the startups that I've been kind of advising, and that is around promoting the individual as best as the individual can be promoted in terms of brand awareness and whatever their potential they want to have is in a particular startup. So if you see startups that are still fostering this inclusivity of a culture of sorts, but they've moved away from, we're tight-knit like a close family and we'll be here forever together through every element, I think what's happened now is it's moved away from that and it's starting to shift a lot more towards we'll be a company that helps you become the best version and most marketable version of yourself. And that might mean for some people creating a stronger brand awareness, creating even more of a LinkedIn presence if that's the influencer world that individual wants to go down, building confidence levels. Are you seeing any of this in the world that you're in, or is this something that is still kind of on the newer, more startups as opposed to established businesses stage?
I would say I see it more in the new businesses and also in consultancies. So a big part of my clients are big consultancies that I'm working with their leaders, their partners, to help them build that personal brand, both from a leadership perspective, but also as salespeople, because essentially that's what a partner is a top salesperson in the company. And I think a lot of companies also realize that their people are the biggest ambassadors of their brand. And the more the brand of the people grows, the more of the brand of the company grows and gets more established. So what I see is that now companies, before I had a lot of individuals coming to me, like CEOs, CTOs, entrepreneurs, founders. Now I see a change where the company is coming and wants to actually invest into growing the people. But again, I will say this is more for new companies rather than the old ones. I feel like there is still a mindset shift that needs to happen on that.
I can imagine. It seems like it's definitely, a lot of times it's probably in the absence of even having sometimes the funds to pay. So that's having the promotion of the right team kind of construct. I love that topic, Yota. So I think maybe then shifting gears a little bit away from kind of the startup, if you will, we have a whole other world emerging, which is around the changing landscape of the VC space, mainly for startups. Now, this really impacts, of course, founders and really anyone in that space. So one of the kind of things that I think we all know, especially if you're in the startup world, is past couple of years have shifted away from just investing blindly and not being able to turn a profit to now focusing on investing in startups that actually have the ability to become profitable. That is one kind of key shift. And two, we've had a huge shift in where funds are flowing, depending on the geography and region that you're in, away from more conservative kind of industries into more explorative industries, which now is the frontier of AI and some other areas as well. But what I wanted to bring up is I think what's happened in the past 2-3 years, which is causing this shift, is the pressure that founders have gone through to be able to deal with that kind of pressure has been immense. And the reality of taking VC funds from potentially VCs that maybe weren't aligned with your values has really surfaced in the past couple of years.
Yes,
and I think
I see that too. Yeah,
you're seeing this too. That's great. So I think one of the interesting things that I wanted to bring up was how important it is for when you have a personal brand, when it comes to being a founder again, not just to get new customers, not just to have talent, retain, not just to build a good culture, but also to pick your VCs and to see how your VCs and you align in the right values. Because if we go through another tough period like we've just come out of, or potentially are still in, having those principles and values aligned is going to be the most important thing.
And I think the key word here is align. Because the thing that surprised me is I thought VCs would be more interested to hire me in order to help their founders. But actually, the trend that I see now happening more and more is that VCs want to work on the personal brand of the people who will reach out to the founder. So the founder picks them as well. And this is exactly what you are describing. It's the alignment part.
So maybe a question then from my side, because I'll start with an example and then maybe go to the question. Yeah. I can imagine when you are a founder, and I've seen it from some of the founders I work with, you have a different narrative to your VC, potentially. That might be controversial, but it's expected. You'll have a different narrative somewhat to the VC to what you'll have to the team, to the market, just because there's different variations. How important, I guess, is it from a brand perspective? Do you have the same principles and values that are aligned from you intrinsically? And should that be both in the face of a VC and in the face of, let's say, the market? Or maybe in your experience, have you seen a variation of values potentially, or ones that are more reserved for others? As an example, just to paint some clarity on it, if you have a VC that is putting money into your business, one of the key values might be, let's say, commitment. Maybe like as a founder, you're very committed and dedicated because the VC really wants to see that you're not going to give up after 12 months. But that could, to your own company, come across in a different way. Positive or negative doesn't really matter. Do you see that at all, or do you feel that that's not actually so relevant?
I definitely see that. So I definitely see that founders want to be aligned in their value system with the VCs that they're choosing, and they're willing not to take money if that jeopardizes the culture of the company or the direction that they want to take their company. But what I see more is that the alignment is not so much in the values between the VC and the company, it's also from the person that makes the contact with the founder within the VC. So these people are acting as ambassadors, again, of their own company, which is the VC. And it's a personal relationship that the founder is developing. So if they get to trust this person and they believe that it's someone who really cares about their business, about the culture, or they have similar values that they align, then they would be willing to work or collaborate with a VC, even though the overall values might not be 100% aligned, because they have trust in that person that will support them and will advocate for them as the conversation is evolving. So one of the things that I see that was really surprising was how important it is, the person and how this person connects with the founder. A lot of times, the other thing that I see with VCs is that they don't know their own stories.
Yes.
So you have someone going to the founder, and the person who is reaching out to the founder doesn't have a strong story that would be compelling and will really create a point of connection with the founder. So it's not just the story of the VC, but it's also the story of the person, because in the end of the day, it's a human relationship here. It will evolve into a business relationship, but the first layer is the human element. And if you don't know why you're talking to this founder, why you find the company interesting, why you want the VC to invest in them, then the founder won't believe you and won't trust you, and will probably go with someone else who has a better story to lay out. So again, I feel there is a lot of misalignment. And also, let's not forget that the world of startups is pretty new. Before, we used to have all these large corporations, and now startups are coming from every side, a lot of VCs as well. So we see a change in the market and how things are happening. I think the startups will be way more than the actual large corporations in the next few years. So we need to understand that there has to be a shift in the way we work and the way we see this relationship. In the past, there were less VCs and a lot of startups wanted to get funded, but now the startups have different options to choose from. So I feel the dynamic is shifting, and I see that more from a practical perspective. What are the inquiries that come to me? And because I work with a lot of industries, different locations from the US all the way here to Europe, and UK as well, it's changing so much. And I see founders getting in a position of strength and choice. Well, before they were acting more from a position of need.
That's really interesting, because I agree with you. And I think every founder probably listening right now has heard the word bridge round probably in the past 12 months to maybe even 24 months or so, or at least heard it from themselves or others. So I think that's a really good, unique point of view, because you're right. The conversation that I've been having this past week with a few different founders has been preparing them for fundraising in the next 12 months. One of them in particular I'm thinking of. And the conversation is no longer about how we think we're going to hopefully get a couple people interested in us. It's actually gone back to the world. Well, I shouldn't say gone back to, but it's starting to have some indications of the 2018 year, where they actually have now, I think, 20 different VC meetings lined up. And I do remember a world where one founder I used to work with had about 120 different meetings over the course of 6 months lined up, which was insane. So that, you're right, optionality is coming and selection is coming. And I think it's nice to see that narrative shifting, because really great ideas that I've seen, and I'm sure you have as well, do get spun out of really good founders that have really good principles and good values that are able to bring something to life. And if you take a good partnership on the VC side and you bring that together harmoniously, it moves away from sometimes the financial pressure to do maybe not the right thing, but do the thing necessarily to try and get the revenue in to ultimately show traction, as opposed to waiting a bit longer, saying no to a potential prospect that you might work with because you know it might destroy your roadmap, it might destroy your company culture, in place of then, say, 6 months down the line, getting a new potential engagement from that.
And that's why I think what you do is so important, because you're giving them all the structures, all the systems of how to approach that. You understand as well personal branding on the back of your head and positioning. So I feel when we merge these two, that's when it's really, really powerful from both sides. Because yes, there are a lot of startups, but there are few startups that you can see real potential, and then everybody wants to invest in them. So in that case, if you have a founder who knows who they are, who know what their values are, what they will say yes. So the personal branding for me also acts as a compass in order to make the right decisions. And when something does not align with who you are, then you know that's not the right thing for you and your company. But if you haven't taken the time and effort to really ask yourself those questions, it's very easy to just make the wrong choice that you might regret. And I was recently working with a very big company and it didn't go well. They broke the company into smaller companies, and they had invested so much into building this culture that then it was just a misalignment between the VC and the goals of the VC and the founder goals. And I think if the founder was really, really clear on the values and what they wanted to create, they would have made a different choice that would have benefited everyone, including the people within the company as well. That's why I think it's important to know what works for you and what doesn't, and who you are, because then you can make the best choices. And founders are putting like their soul within their company. It's so much hard work, so much effort, so much emotional investment. So I think it's the responsibility to themselves to do the inner work, so they have that compass and it's very, very clear, and it can be there for them anytime they need it. And that's when the VC comes, that they also should do this work. So when they approach the founder, is there to know if there's alignment here, if that's going to work well for both sides or not. And for me, it's very, very simple, but there's definitely a shift here that needs to happen.
A couple of the final points, maybe just before we kind of move on to some of the end of the episode. But one of the things I want to just bring as a topic before we move on to a couple of questions I have is basically what I'm understanding from this conversation, even more than I did going into this conversation, is personal brand is necessary. Full stop. It is evident that it's necessary. I think we've seen personal branding now throughout a lot of different areas of the business, but ultimately startups, businesses with founders that have a strong team that also invest in personal brand also have a significantly lower cost of acquisition. So when it comes to VCs, one of the things that I'm finding as well is that high acquisition cost to get going, to find a new customer, especially if you've got a really enterprise level prospect and you're maybe dealing with seed funding or maybe Series A funding, you have an insurmountable task, because what you have is potentially a sales cycle that could be 18 months. You have maybe 12 months of runway, and you need to show traction within 6 to try and get potentially an extension or begin that journey. So that period, for any founder listening in, you probably feel that pressure very uniquely, and that's a very difficult one to be in. With personal brand, and to your point around combining this with how sales marketing is benefiting or benefited by personal brand, if you're entering that stage with a solid personal brand as an executive team, founder, whoever really is responsible for that phase, you actually are significantly lowering your acquisition costs and potentially shortening your sales cycles, because you're already getting trust out of the gate. So you don't need to focus on building trust later on in the sales cycle. You don't need to spend a lot of money on marketing and all these campaigns to try and find leads. People are naturally gravitating towards you if you have a solid brand yourself. And 3, you have potentially less likely of a misaligned hire, because you've hired based on really aligned principles. So if you have to bring an expert salesperson on board and they turn out to be the wrong fit because of maybe a misalignment of values, you're not setting yourself back 6 months, because that could kill your business. So from a VC point of view, I could also imagine if I was in the VC shoes for a second and I'm scouting different portfolio companies to be, putting money into, I would be looking at, right, is there a solid personal brand kind of here? So I wanted to, finish with that point before asking you really, one really important question about personal brand. Really, for anyone that maybe is new tuning in to what personal brand is, because I think even myself in the past have been naive to think, like you said, personal brand is a LinkedIn social media campaign, or it's, certain content that I post on my different channels. How can you maybe define personal brand for people that are kind of just waking up to the fact that they have to now bring this into their business, and where could they even begin to kind of start from that point of view?
I want to add a point to what you were saying before, that I totally agree with you about what are the benefits of doing that. And I think the personal brand will open the door. The sales strategy is going to close the deal.
Love that.
I think that's the difference. And people do not understand that when someone knows you already, half work, half job is done. When my clients come to me, they already know me. They have seen my testimonials, they have seen content from me. Everywhere they meet me online, there is alignment. That's because I know who I am and I know what I stand for. And no matter if you meet me in person or you see me online, you're going to see the exact same person. So immediately people feel so comfortable to be around. So I don't even have to sell, because half of the sale is done before they even reach out to me.
You're also exclusive. It's not, you don't work with everybody as well, so
yes,
it creates a
that
bit of
also
scarcity.
plays some role, I think. I agree with you. I think, after a few years, I'm in a privileged position to also choose, because I feel my work is so important and I really want to amplify the brands that I believe in them. And the founders and the leaders that I really think we need to amplify their work, their personality, because they have so much to give back. That does play a role. Back to your question on what is personal branding, where to start from. For me, and I know a lot of people don't like that because it feels like you're going to a therapist. I'm not a therapist, I'm a coach, I promise.
Good reminder.
But you have to do the inner work, because you need to understand basic things that are really, really important. Like, what is your why? What are your values? What is it that you want to create? What is the impact that you want to leave in this world? Whether you're a leader, a founder, a VC, it doesn't really matter. But I think start by understanding those fundamental questions. What is your audience? And that's where a bit marketing and sales, they all come together. And I think now it's emerged. Without the right positioning, we see a lot of marketing and sales failing. That's why you're so busy, right? Because they see that they're like, I'm doing all the marketing, why I'm not selling? And some of them, it is because they don't have the systems and the processes, which you're amazing at helping them with. But a lot of times it's because they're missing the positioning. And when the positioning is wrong, everything else is failing, because people understand that something is off here, there is a misalignment, or they keep changing strategy again and again and again. That is because there's no good foundation. Whether it's the foundation of the brand as an individual or the brand as a company, it's equally important. So for me, the foundation is, and every time I work with someone, I'll try to understand who is the person, what do they care about, what do they want to create. And then we start all the fancy stuff, which is from even the styling. A lot of times people are making jokes about taking my clients shopping, but that is so important because it is your image and it is what people see. I don't want to help someone just look nice. I want them to look themselves. And what I see in a lot of founders, I was recently looking at a founder I'm working with, and he raised quite a lot of money. He created an amazing startup, is in health tech and the health tech space. And then I would see his image and how he looks like, and you cannot really tell how amazing he is because his styling just downplays his role. It is the role of the scientist that he had before. Now he has a new role. That's the role of the founder.
That's a good point.
And this is the same person, but it is someone who has grown over the years. Yes, he might have been the scientist before, but now he's a founder, he's a leader. That is a different role. That is an evolution of the same person. And the way we talk, the way we show up has to demonstrate that revolution. This person is not the same person who was just in a laboratory a few years back. This person now has a vision and a strategy and wants to create impact. So there is a change that has happened, and maybe it has happened so quickly or unexpectedly that even the person hasn't realized. So they're still holding that old version of themselves, but it's not the version of the person who built that company and had that vision. So even from the styling, the photo shoot, the way they show up in public speaking, in media and interviews, it is so important because he has to embrace the new version of himself, who is really different than the version that he was a few years back.
So that's interesting because I personally can relate to that from a startup I used to work with, where we had a very technical founder that was, pushed into a CEO position. And so was amazing at technology, amazing at convincing people of the technical things, had a learning curve to become the CEO of a business, because that's a whole different world, as you said. So if I hear you correctly, it's interesting because I'll tie it now to the kind of sales world that I see. We advise whenever a startup or any real scale up, doesn't matter, is going to market. A common question that I get from a lot of founders is, I can sell to this company, I can sell to these people. They're in two different worlds. And there's, by the way, a third one we could sell to. So we have lots of different people we could sell to. How do we sell to all these people? How can I be this thing to this thing and this thing to that person, but yet have one product? And so what we have is a strategy which is called, defining your beachhead strategy, which is around, yes, you can do that, but which of these three is going to have the most value from working with your product? Pretty standard, approach. But it's interesting you say that, because then tying it from that, what we advise on then is a marketing and sales strategy. So how do you find those customers? What's the narrative you put in place? What's the brand have to look like to convince them? So if you've got a highly regulated product, you need to really instill trust. And so even that comes down to, the color palette of your logo and how that presents.
Everything plays a role.
And from personal branding, that's just as much as important, it seems.
And a lot of founders, they're just missing that link. All my background has been in tech. I worked in tech for 15 years, from small companies all the way to Amazon, to Yahoo. So I really understand the tech industry and fintech industry from the inside out, just because of my experience. And I think I have seen so many, your example was really spot on, because there are a lot of people who might be very good on a technical level, and then they're building something, and then there's an identity shift that needs to happen. The key here is that the identity shift needs to happen first internally, in order to show. We don't want to go and create something because that's what the founder should look like. This founder has elements, and it might be even introversion, right? We see in tech, a lot of people are introverts. That's why they chose tech, because they want to be with their laptop doing their work. They didn't want to be around 1,000 people talking and all of that. But then they have evolved through the years. They had a good idea. They built a company. That is an identity shift. They made that choice, but they might not be even aware that, I'm actually now exploring new aspects of my personality that are equally strong. They might feel uncomfortable, and it's not something that maybe I'm used to do, but it's in there. So the foundation is there, and that's when the personal branding comes and amplifies that. And we're giving them the right voice. So it sounds like them, and it's an evolved version of themselves. It's not different than who they are. It's still the same person. It's just the evolution that has happened. And how can we use that voice to speak to the right people? Because as you said, my strategy I have 3 different people, it would be really strong about who you are, and then you will attract these people, because a strong brand is magnetic. And that's when we know that the brand is strong, is because people start coming to us rather than we have to chase people.
It's interesting because I think, building on what you've talked about with the founder now all of a sudden becoming in these new responsibilities, I do also think there's a world where maybe a very technical founder that has become a CEO all of a sudden maybe isn't ready to be the CEO of like another company that has a strong, CEO characteristic of them. So it's interesting because even when it comes to personal branding, and I imagine the work that's being done with you're also uncovering where they're short on certain skills, right? You'll also understand maybe there is a strong leadership element when it comes to tech, but maybe there isn't such a strong extroversion or being an extrovert. So what's interesting is it helps guide our sales and marketing team on who even needs to be hired to complement these skills?
100%. And all these are specific skills that can be developed. So a lot of people, they say, I am like this, but that's not a growth mindset. That's a fixed mindset.
True.
No matter what you do, you can develop to be the version of the self that you want to be. The question here is, do they want to be? Because a lot of time from the conversations I might have with founders who became CEOs is that they might not want to develop those skills. And that's a conscious choice. So they might decide to bring an external CEO that is actually wants to do all of this stuff, and they prefer to have a different role in the company. So I feel that is all for me. It's part of personal branding and the exploration that happens. A lot of other times, as you mentioned, we're identifying very specific skills. We might bring a public speaking coach as well. In most of the cases, I would say we always bring someone to help with the styling, just to make sure that the image aligns with that. I feel I'm always working in parallel with all the teams internally, whether that's marketing, whether that's sales. It's not that I just will work with the CEO and then that's done. It has to be aligned because the personality of the person who built the company is probably within the company in the culture in different ways. And we need to see where is their alignment, or maybe even the company in the direction that has taken, it has some new values that may have not been the core values of the CEO, but there's still some level of alignment. So where is that alignment?
Yeah.
How do we find that? And then how do we use that in order to attract our ideal customers, our ideal people, investment, buyers, whatever is the goals that we have. So always the strategy and the brand we're building is aligned with the end goal, and make sure, how can I help them get there easier?
It's a really good point you raised, because when a new fundraising round comes in, a lot of times that can sometimes change some of the values, not necessarily the core values of a business, but can change some of the values. If you're now all of a sudden, let's say you were selling a smaller prospect or customer segment, so maybe your contracts were less than 100,000 a year, for example, but now all of a sudden you're going after large enterprise deals. You can have the same values, I should say, but you can't have the same approach to those values in terms of how you service those customers.
Presence and positioning is what I would say, the words that I would use to describe that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because the values can be the same, but what is changing is the presence and the positioning of the values.
Agreed. And so this is where you have this moment of change that comes in. And so how does that translate, and how can it transpire throughout the entire organization? Because, I mean, you've got lots of experience with this, but I mainly from the sales world, whenever we suddenly get a new round in a startup and we have to start scaling up a commercial engine, a new person will usually join the company or a team on the CRO side, and that person typically brings with them a new set of approach to the certain values or how to go about that. And so you end up finding different dynamics coming in. And so that's interesting that you mentioned this shift, because yeah, I think it also becomes really relevant when businesses start to scale, even commercial teams, to make sure they kind of get there. Good. Well, Yota, I know we've got not that much time left, so I just would say, look, any points that you feel are really important for people that are adopting personal brand, any founders that may be listening to this and saying, yes, I need to do this, but my calendars are so blocked and got so much on my plate right now, how could I even begin this? Anything you really feel that's important for
First of all, I would say this is an investment, and you need to see that as investment that will bring you return. And I think the main takeaway would be, first of all, asking yourself, are you clear on the type of questions that I've asked? Are you clear on the values? Are you clear on what do you want to create? Are you clear on what's the impact that you want to have? Are you clear on your audience that you want to reach? Are you clear on how you want people to feel when they interact with you, with the company, with the brand, with all of that? So a lot of people might think that they're doing a good work, but when they start asking the real questions, they might realize there are gaps in there. And then if you're doing all that, is there alignment between what you're doing as a founder or as a leader or as a VC with what is happening at the company and the culture and the way you're approaching your people? Because I think the reason that this conversation is so interesting is because it's showing us that sales and branding are not two different things.
I agree.
But they need to work together. And when we do projects like that, there's a lot of collaboration happening to make sure all the work that I do is very much aligned and comes to life through the processes and the procedures and everything that you're helping them build. So if your different departments are working in silos, I feel that's an area that I would invite them to think through and how could they bring more alignment between the different teams in order to make sure there's one message that starts from the CEO, the founder, all the way to every single person who is working in the organization, because these people are representing, these people is the organization. Wherever they go, they represent the company. And if they don't know what they represent, then they can damage your brand. While if they do, then you have a huge opportunity because you're amplifying your impact every single time with every single person that is within their team. And that's why a lot of times when we do the values work, then we do the values of the organization, and then we do the leadership style. So everything, we see how is that connected all the way from the founder values and the values of the company to how is the company operating. So we're training the leaders on the values, behaviorally, what does it mean? How do they behave in people? So I would just invite people to think about the conversation that we had from different angles. I think we brought some interesting points that I see that a lot, there are blind spots. So a lot of my clients and the people that come to me, I feel they have these huge blind spots that they are so easy. It really doesn't require huge time investment. It just requires the right mindset and the right actions. But then there's such huge opportunity and it goes missed.
I completely agree with you. I think this has been a really great topic of discussion, because even from my side, I'm convinced now that any future sales marketing team, startup that's founder-led sales, if you don't have brand, you don't really have a company going forward. You need to, and this goes beyond just the brand of a company, but an individual brand. Individually as a founder, individually as a sales executive, individually as any kind of person that's responsible for basically bringing that narrative to the market. So I just want to say thank you. This has been really great. I feel really motivated.
I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Happy to keep it going. So thanks a lot, Yota. And thanks for everyone listening in.